Elias Vance had been awake for 18 hours, which was roughly 4 hours beyond the point where every machine aboard the Celestial Meridian began to look personally offensive. The transport ship was one of the largest civilian vessels crossing the Valorian trade routes, a silver-skinned giant carrying nearly 6,000 passengers through 3 star systems, and somewhere deep inside its engineering deck, a gravitic stabilizer had decided that gravity was more of a suggestion than a law. Elias had spent most of his shift wedged shoulder first into a maintenance shaft barely wide enough for a cargo drone, replacing a burned phase regulator while warning the ship's artificial intelligence that if it played the safety announcement one more time, he would personally teach it the meaning of fear. "Threatening onboard intelligence is against company policy," the AI had replied. "So is dropping paying passengers onto the ceiling," Elias muttered. The AI had gone silent for almost 6 seconds, which he considered a moral victory. By the time the stabilizer finally settled into a healthy blue pulse, Elias's dark work shirt was streaked with conductive grease, one knuckle was bleeding, and the emergency caffeine patch on his neck had stopped pretending to help. He locked his battered tool case, handed control of the system back to the night crew, and went looking for somewhere quiet enough to eat. That was when he discovered the crew transit cabin had been sealed because of a coolant leak. "Of course it has," he whispered. The nearest maintenance technician shrugged. "Passenger deck?" Elias stared at him. The technician smiled sympathetically. "Try not to frighten anyone." 5 minutes later, Elias stepped into one of the vast civilian observation cabins, carrying a grey meal container and looking exactly like a man who had recently fought gravity and barely won. The compartment curved along the ship's outer hull. Hundreds of passengers sat beneath soft amber lights, while beyond the enormous transparent alloy windows, the stars stretched across black space like frost scattered over glass. Unfortunately, every seat seemed occupied. Elias walked down the aisle, balancing his meal on top of his tool case. Families clustered together. Merchants argued over holographic contracts. 2 blue-skinned pilgrims slept beneath synchronized breathing masks. Somewhere nearby, a child was repeatedly asking a service drone whether robots dreamed. The drone finally answered, "Not of children." Elias almost applauded. Then he saw the empty seat. It was beside a woman sitting near the observation window. She appeared human at first glance, perhaps in her early 30s, though Elias knew better than to estimate alien ages. Her face was composed and striking, framed by dark hair that fell loosely over her shoulders. Only her ears immediately revealed that she was Valorian, long, elegant, tapering to narrow points beneath her hair. She wore a simple charcoal traveling coat with silver seams, expensive-looking, but without any visible family crest or governmental insignia. There was something unusual about her stillness. Everyone else in the crowded cabin seemed restless, distracted or exhausted. She simply watched the stars. Elias stopped beside the seat. "Taken?" The woman turned. Her eyes were unusually dark, almost violet beneath the cabin lights. "No." Her voice was calm. Elias dropped into the seat before the universe could change its mind. "Excellent. If anyone asks, I died here peacefully." A tiny movement touched the corner of her mouth. Elias placed his tool case between his boots and opened the meal container. Warm steam rose from something vaguely beige. The woman glanced at it. "What is that?" Elias examined the food thoughtfully. "The machine claims it's Terran chicken." "Do you disagree?" "I've met chickens." That earned him the first real smile. Elias stabbed the synthetic meat with his fork. "They've changed the recipe again. Last month it tasted like insulation foam. Now it tastes like expensive insulation foam." The woman laughed softly. 3 rows behind them, a broad-shouldered Valorian man in civilian clothing turned his head sharply. Elias noticed him and lowered his voice. "See? Even he knows I'm right." The woman followed his glance for only a moment. "I think he may be looking at me." Elias considered this. "Then he has excellent taste and poor manners." For the first time, the woman looked genuinely surprised. Elias was too tired to notice. He leaned back, watching distant stars crawl across the window. Long trip? Longer than expected. Diplomatic work? Her eyebrow rose. What makes you think that? You have the expression. What expression? The one people get after spending all day listening to important people say things that could have been said in 3 sentences. She covered another laugh with her hand. Elias pointed his fork at her. Knew it. She studied him now with quiet curiosity. And you? Mechanic. I gathered that. He looked down at the grease covering his clothes. Was it my sophisticated manner? The wrench attached to your belt helped. Elias glanced at it. Ah, the ceremonial wrench, symbol of my people. She laughed again, more freely this time. Behind them, another passenger exchanged a tense glance with the broad-shouldered man. Neither Elias nor the woman acknowledged it. Elias took another bite, grimaced, then pushed half the food toward her. Hungry? She looked at the container as though no stranger had ever casually offered her food before. Is it safe? No. She stared at him. Elias smiled. But statistically, neither is space travel. After a moment, the elegant Valorian woman beside him accepted the fork, and 3 rows behind them, one of Queen Seralyne's disguised royal guards quietly touched the communicator hidden beneath his collar. Seralyne accepted the fork as though Elias had handed her a classified military artifact, rather than a piece of synthetic chicken. She turned it once beneath the amber cabin lights, studied its suspiciously perfect texture, then took a careful bite. Elias watched her expression with the solemn attention of a scientist awaiting the result of a dangerous experiment. Well? He asked. Seralyne chewed, swallowed, and looked toward the stars. I believe the chicken died twice. Elias stared at her for a second, then laughed hard enough to draw looks from the passengers across the aisle. That may be the most accurate review this kitchen has ever received. Seralyne's smile lingered. It had been years since conversation had felt this effortless. At court, every sentence spoken to her carried calculation. Diplomats weighed every word. Ministers rehearsed disagreements until they sounded like compliments. Even old friends had gradually learned to watch her face before deciding whether something was funny. Elias did none of that. He simply ate terrible food beside her and behaved as though she were nobody important. That, she discovered, was strangely pleasant. So, Elias said, scraping sauce from one side of the container. If you're some kind of diplomat, explain something to me. That sounds dangerous. It is. Why does the Valorian Transport Authority require Form 17C before a mechanic can replace a plasma relay? Seralyne blinked. I'm not familiar with every maintenance regulation. Lucky you. 17C requires confirmation that the old relay is defective. That seems reasonable. You only receive the form after removing the defective relay. She paused. Elias continued. But regulations say you cannot remove the defective relay without authorization from Form 17C. Seralyne's lips twitched. So what do you do? Lie creatively? She laughed. 3 rows behind them, Commander Tavrin closed his eyes briefly. His queen was laughing at regulatory fraud. Elias, unaware that his career was surviving entirely because Seralyne found him amusing, leaned closer. Last year I spent 6 hours arguing with an administrative intelligence because it demanded the serial number from a component that had melted into the wall. Did you win? No. We reached a philosophical disagreement about the definition of component. Seralyne looked down, trying unsuccessfully to hide her smile. The ship glided deeper into the Vesper transit corridor, where distant blue clouds of ionized dust shimmered beyond the observation windows. Tiny navigation drones moved outside the hull like sparks against the darkness, scanning gravitational currents before the vessel entered its next hyperspace lane. Elias stretched his aching shoulders. I don't blame the workers, though. Most of these rules come from people who've never held a wrench. That is a broad accusation. It's a broad bureaucracy. And what would you change? He glanced at her. The question sounded more serious than the others. Make the people writing regulations spend 1 month doing the jobs affected by them. Seralyne's expression changed slightly. 1 month? Minimum. Put transport ministers in engine rooms. Put trade officials in cargo docks. Put whoever designed our emergency sanitation system inside a broken lavatory during artificial gravity failure. She nearly choked on the food. Elias nodded gravely. Justice. Seralyne laughed again, but this time she studied him afterward. There was no bitterness in his voice. He joked because humor made frustration bearable, not because he enjoyed tearing things down. Beneath the grease and exhaustion was an observant mind, one accustomed to seeing consequences that never reached polished conference tables. And the royal household? She asked casually. Would you make changes there too? Elias groaned. Oh, absolutely. Commander Tavron's eyes opened. Seralyne turned slightly toward Elias. Such as? Anti-gravity fountains. She went very still. Elias gestured with his fork. I heard the royal palace has 6. 4. He slowly looked at her. Seralyne realized her mistake. 4? I read about them. Elias narrowed his eyes. You read about royal fountains? I enjoy architecture. That is the most diplomatic answer you've given all evening. She folded her hands neatly. And what objection do you have to them? They're fountains where the water flows upward. Yes. Water already had a direction. We solved that problem millions of years ago. Seralyne smiled despite herself. They are ceremonial. Of course they are. Nobody wastes money, practically. A nearby elderly passenger coughed to hide a laugh. Commander Tavron looked increasingly as though he wished the merciless vacuum of space would swallow Elias before the conversation reached taxation. Seralyne, however, felt something loosen inside her. What do you imagine the Queen is like? She asked. Elias considered the question longer than she expected. Probably tired. Her amusement faded. Why? Because everyone must want something from her. Seralyne looked at him. Elias shrugged. People imagine rulers sitting around eating imported fruit and ordering statues of themselves. Maybe some do, but running half a star sector sounds miserable. Every border dispute, trade shortage, colony argument, military problem, it eventually lands on one desk. For several seconds, Seralyne said nothing. Outside, blue starlight washed across her face. You sound almost sympathetic. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation. She smiled faintly. Elias pushed the remaining food toward her. Here, finish it. You don't want it? I'm making a noble sacrifice. For me? For my stomach. Seralyne accepted another bite. Behind them, Tavron murmured into his hidden communicator. Her Majesty remains secure. A voice answered in his earpiece. And the human? Tavron watched Elias demonstrate, with 2 forks, how he believed imperial committees designed machinery. He sighed. The human remains unfortunately comfortable. The celestial meridian entered the outer edge of the Vesper Rift, beneath a sky that no planet-born language had ever properly learned to describe. Beyond the observation windows, magnetic storms rolled across space in vast curtains of electric blue and pale violet, bending charged dust into luminous rivers that twisted around invisible gravitational tides. Every few seconds, the ship's hull resonated with a low metallic hum, as its field projectors compensated for the turbulence. Elias watched the display above the window update its safety warnings and shook his head. Beautiful place, he said. Excellent location to discover whether the engineers lied about the specifications. Seralyne glanced at him. You are one of the engineers. Exactly. That's why I'm worried. She smiled and returned her attention to the rift. Their empty meal containers sat between them now, forgotten. Elias had expected the conversation to die naturally after food and complaints, but somehow it had survived both. Seralyne asked about Earth, then about the mining habitats where Elias had spent most of his childhood. He told her about stations where children learned pressure seal drills before multiplication, where recycled air carried the metallic scent of machinery, and where everyone knew that a malfunctioning oxygen scrubber had more authority than any governor. Machines are honest, Elias said. When they're broken, they usually admit it. People do not? People hold meetings. Seralyne laughed softly. And you always wanted to become a mechanic? No, I wanted to become incredibly wealthy and professionally useless. That sounds ambitious. I failed magnificently. He leaned back while artificial gravity shifted almost imperceptibly beneath their feet. Seralyne studied him in profile. Most people who spoke to her tried to fill silence. Elias seemed perfectly comfortable allowing it to exist. What about you? He asked eventually. Did you always want diplomatic work? The question caught her. I inherited certain responsibilities. That sounds like a polite way of saying no. Seralyne's gaze remained on the stars. I was raised for them. Worse. She turned to him. Worse? If someone chooses a miserable career, at least they can blame themselves. For a moment she looked almost offended. Then she laughed. You have an alarming philosophy. I developed it during coolant pipe maintenance. She shook her head, still smiling. If you disliked your work that much, why remain? Elias considered the question. Because sometimes something breaks and everyone else starts panicking. Then you fix it, the lights come back on, people breathe normally again, and for about 10 seconds you know exactly why you're there. Seralyne's expression softened. He noticed. You get that look sometimes. What look? Like you're carrying something heavy nobody else can see. Her long ears shifted slightly beneath her dark hair. That is an unusually personal observation for someone I met an hour ago. I spend my life diagnosing things by noises they're not supposed to make. Am I making a noise? Metaphorically. That is disappointing. Elias grinned. For several minutes they watched the storm together. Then Seralyne said, almost casually, Suppose I abandon my responsibilities. What occupation would you recommend? Mechanic. She stared at him. Immediately. You've already survived the food. I have no technical training. Neither do half the people who approve our repairs. Her laughter came freely now. Elias was beginning to enjoy it. He did not notice that Commander Tavron, 3 rows behind them, had stopped pretending to read his data pad. A second disguised guard had moved near the forward door, then a third. Elias noticed that. He looked toward the broad-shouldered man, then toward another Valorian woman standing near the service alcove. Both were pretending not to watch Seralyne. His posture changed slightly. Seralyne caught it. What is it? Nothing. That was clearly something. Elias lowered his voice. You know those people? She glanced back briefly. No. It was technically true in the way only royalty and lawyers could appreciate. Elias nodded slowly. Right. What? They keep watching you. Seralyne almost smiled. Perhaps they find my ears fascinating. They're Valorian. They have ears. A fair point. The broad-shouldered man shifted in his seat. Elias shifted too, placing his tool case closer to the aisle. Seralyne watched him do it. You are moving your tools. Better access. To what? The ceremonial wrench, her mouth twitched. You believe I am in danger? I believe 3 people are watching you like you stole something expensive. Seralyne folded her hands. And your plan is? If necessary, improvise badly. That does not inspire confidence. It shouldn't. A vibration passed through the deck. Outside, the rift flashed brilliant white as distant lightning rippled through the magnetic clouds. Elias kept his eyes on the supposed strangers. He did not see Seralyne glance toward Commander Tavrin. Tavrin met her eyes for half a second. The Queen gave the smallest possible shake of her head. Do nothing. Tavrin's jaw tightened. Beside her, Elias leaned slightly toward the aisle, unknowingly placing himself between Queen Seralyne and her own royal guards. She looked at him, and something warm and unfamiliar moved behind her careful expression. You are a very strange mechanic, Elias Vance. He shrugged. You offered me half your terrible chicken. You offered it to me. Then I'm even stranger. Before she could answer, every light in the observation cabin flickered. Once. Twice. Then the stars outside abruptly vanished as the celestial meridian dropped out of hyperspace. And somewhere deep inside the ship, an alarm began to howl. The alarm did not sound like the calm warning tones used during drills. It screamed through the observation cabin in harsh mechanical pulses, while the celestial meridian shuddered hard enough to throw several passengers sideways against their restraints. For half a second, the artificial gravity vanished entirely. Elias rose from his seat without intending to. His meal container drifted toward the ceiling, and somewhere behind him a child shouted with delighted surprise, "Again!" Gravity returned violently. Elias crashed back into his chair. The meal container struck the floor. I officially withdraw my earlier complaint, he muttered. The food has improved. The panoramic windows darkened automatically as defensive filters activated. Beyond them, the brilliant Vesper rift had been replaced by open black space filled with fragments of blue electromagnetic fire. 3 angular vessels emerged from distortion fields off the starboard side, their hulls coated in light-bending armor that shimmered like liquid glass. Seralyne's expression changed instantly. The relaxed woman beside Elias disappeared. Her shoulders straightened, her gaze sharpened, and one hand moved beneath her coat. Elias noticed. What do you have under there? A communicator. That answer was disappointingly legal. Before she could respond, another impact rolled through the ship. A synthetic voice filled the cabin. Attention! External weapons discharge detected. All passengers remain secured. Defensive systems are engaging. Elias looked toward the nearest bulkhead display. Shield integrity had dropped to 68%. That's not good. Seralyne's eyes stayed on the tactical indicators. How bad? Depends. On what? Whether you enjoy explosions. She gave him a flat look. Then bad. The broad-shouldered Valorian, 3 rows behind them, was already standing. 2 others moved with him. Elias saw them reach beneath their civilian coats. His hand went immediately to the wrench at his belt. Seralyne saw that too. Elias? They're coming toward you. They are not the problem. That is exactly what suspicious people say before becoming the problem. The 3 Valorians moved closer. Then the ship lurched again. A section of ceiling paneling tore loose and crashed into the aisle. Passengers screamed. Emergency lights flooded the cabin red. Elias abandoned the guards entirely and ran toward the fallen panel. A young passenger was trapped beneath one edge. Help me lift this! Seralyne was beside him before he could ask twice. Together they raised the panel while another passenger pulled the injured man free. A hiss sounded from the wall. Elias froze. That one is worse. A narrow cloud of white vapor spilled from an access seam. Coolant? Seralyne asked. Atmosphere regulator. He dropped to his knees, ripped open the maintenance panel, and stared at the flashing circuits inside. You carry tools everywhere? I'm emotionally dependent on them. Another blast struck. The lights flickered. Elias jammed a diagnostic probe into the exposed system. Pressure valve is stuck. If it closes completely, half this compartment loses air.
How long?
2 minutes. Seralyne looked toward the frightened passengers.
Can you repair it?
No. She stared at him. Elias reached deeper into the panel. But I can insult it until it cooperates. His fingers moved rapidly through bundled superconductive lines. A service drone rolled toward him, announcing emergency instructions. Please do not interfere with environmental systems. Elias snapped. Please do not interfere with the mechanic. Unauthorized modification detected. Yes. Cease immediately. No. Security notification initiated. Tell them I'm busy. Seralyne laughed, despite the alarms. Then the environmental indicator switched from red to amber. Airflow stabilized. Elias exhaled. See? Fear works. The cabin doors exploded inward. This time, no one laughed. 3 armored figures rushed through the smoke, carrying compact phase rifles that glowed white around their barrels. The disguised Valorians immediately drew weapons. Elias grabbed Seralyne by the arm and pulled her behind the overturned panel. Stay down. Her eyes widened.
Elias.
I know. You're a diplomat. Congratulations. Be diplomatic from down here. Energy fire cracked across the cabin. The 3 men Elias had suspected returned fire with frightening precision. One of them shouted, "Secure Her Majesty!" Elias stopped. For one absurd second, he assumed there must be another royal passenger nearby. Then every disguised guard moved toward Seralyne. Commander Tavern dropped to one knee beside her. Your Majesty, we must evacuate immediately. Silence seemed to expand inside Elias's head despite the weapons fire. He slowly turned. Seralyne met his stare. Her expression contained apology. Elias looked at Tavern, then at Seralyne, then at the long ears he had spent 2 hours casually joking beside. You. Another blast shook the cabin. Seralyne winced.
Yes.
You're the queen.
Yes.
The actual queen.
Yes, Elias.
He stared at her in horror. I complained about your government.
You did.
I mocked your palace.
You did.
The fountains. A faint smile touched her mouth.
Especially the fountains.
Elias closed his eyes for 1 second. Wonderful. He pulled the ceremonial wrench from his belt as another armored attacker entered through the smoke. I finally meet royalty, and naturally someone starts shooting. The next burst of phase fire carved a glowing line across the bulkhead above Elias's head. He ducked instinctively, wrench still clutched in one hand, while Commander Tavern pulled Seralyne behind the reinforced base of the observation seats. Your Majesty, evacuation route Delta is compromised, Tavern said into his communicator. Route Gamma? Unknown. Then make it known. Elias looked at Seralyne. You sound different when people are shooting at you. She gave him a brief glance.
You sound exactly the same.
That is because panic requires energy I no longer possess. A royal guard fired twice toward the breached doorway. One attacker fell, armor sparking, but another rolled behind a support column and returned fire. Passengers crawled toward the rear emergency partition as automated drones unfolded protective barriers from the ceiling. Tavern seized Elias by the shoulder. You, stay here. Elias looked down at the hand, then at Tavern.
You're the man who has been staring at me for 2 hours.
I was protecting the queen.
I thought you were planning to rob her.
Tavern's expression did not change. With a wrench?
It is a very respectable wrench.
Enough, Seralyne snapped, though Elias could hear amusement beneath the urgency.
We need a functioning escape route.
Tavern activated a holographic map above his wrist.
Several corridors blinked red. The Royal Evacuation Module remains intact, but launch control is refusing authorization. Elias leaned closer. Because your gravitic compensators are unstable. Tavern frowned. How do you know? I spent 14 hours repairing them. Seralyne looked at him sharply. Can they be stabilized? Not from here. Another explosion rolled through the vessel. The floor tilted several degrees before artificial gravity corrected itself. Elias glanced at the cabin display. Shield integrity, 41%. Then he saw the propulsion readings. His humor disappeared. That's worse. Seralyne noticed immediately. What? The phase attacks aren't just hitting the shields. They're disrupting the gravitic field around the propulsion core. Tavern looked between them. Explain. If you launch an escape pod while that field is fluctuating, the pod could get caught in the ship's gravity wake. What happens then? Elias grimaced. It becomes a very expensive meteor. Tavern deactivated the evacuation command. Seralyne's eyes moved toward the hundreds of civilians still being herded into protected sections. Then we do not leave. Your Majesty. No. The word was quiet, but final. Elias studied her. For the first time since learning her identity, he understood why everyone around her obeyed so quickly. Tavern's jaw tightened. Our orders are to preserve your life, and mine are to preserve theirs. A shockwave passed through the hull. The tactical screen showed another enemy vessel moving closer. Elias stared at the power distribution map. Then something occurred to him. Maybe we don't need to repair the gravitic system. Tavern turned. You just said. I said we can't repair it. Different problem. He pointed toward the ship's schematic. The luxury decks have independent gravity generators. Seralyne followed his finger. You want to use them? I want to rip every jewel they have and dump it into the defensive shield network. Tavern stared at him. That would overload half the upper decks. Yes. The royal suites are on those decks. Elias slowly looked at Seralyne. She already knew what was coming. He smiled faintly. Your fountains may finally serve the public. For 1 second, nobody spoke. Then Seralyne laughed. During a firefight. Tavern looked personally betrayed by the universe. Do it, she ordered. Elias grabbed his tool case. I'll need access to the gravitic junction beneath engineering. I'm coming with you, Seralyne said. No. Her eyebrows rose.
Elias remembered, slightly too late, who he was speaking to. Respectfully, no. That was not more convincing. Tavern stepped forward. Her Majesty stays with the guard. Seralyne looked at him. Commander, the attackers know I am aboard. They will keep striking this ship until they have me or the vessel is destroyed. If Elias can restore the shields, protecting him protects me. Tavern clearly disliked the logic because it was good logic. 30 seconds later, they were moving. Elias led them into a service corridor beneath the passenger decks, while emergency lights strobed along the walls. Seralyne followed with Tavern and 2 guards. Energy blasts echoed somewhere behind them. You really are coming? Elias asked. You appear surprised. I'm reconsidering several opinions I expressed about royalty. Only several? Let's not become unrealistic. They reached a maintenance hatch. Elias opened it. A narrow vertical shaft dropped 20 meters through bundles of glowing power conduits. Seralyne looked down. You expect the Queen to climb through that? Elias clipped his tool case to his belt. No, I expect the woman who ate synthetic chicken with me to climb through that. Her expression softened for half a heartbeat. Then she stepped onto the ladder. "Lead the way, mechanic." They descended while the ship trembled around them. At the bottom, Elias forced open another hatch and entered a low engineering tunnel filled with blue coolant mist. The hum of the gravitic network vibrated through the floor. He checked his scanner. The readings were worse than expected. Someone had deliberately altered the field harmonics. "This wasn't collateral damage," he said. Seralyne crouched beside him. "What do you mean?" Elias showed her the display. "There's a resonance signature embedded in the system. Someone planted something inside the propulsion network." Tavern's face hardened. "A sabotage device?" Elias nodded. "And if I'm reading this correctly, removing it the wrong way will rupture the gravitic core." Seralyne stared at the pulsing schematic. "How long do we have?" Elias looked at the rapidly climbing energy curve. "Not enough." She drew a compact energy pistol from beneath her coat and looked toward the dark tunnel ahead. "Then we should stop wasting it." Elias tightened his grip on the tool case. "Your Majesty?" "Yes?" "If we survive this, I reserve the right to complain about royal travel arrangements." Seralyne smiled. "If we survive this, Elias Vance, I may give you an office specifically for that purpose." Together they moved deeper into the wounded ship. The deeper they moved into the engineering spine, the less the celestial meridian resembled a luxury transport, and the more it felt like the inside of a wounded animal. Blue emergency strips flickered along the narrow walls, coolant vapor curled around their boots, and somewhere beyond the bulkheads, enormous magnetic pumps groaned under loads they had never been designed to carry. Elias led the way with his scanner raised, following the resonance signature through a maze of service conduits. Seralyne remained close behind him, her compact pistol held low but ready, while Tavern and the two guards watched the darkness behind them. The signal stopped at a circular maintenance chamber surrounding the secondary gravitic manifold. Elias stared through the open access frame. There. A device the size of his fist had been fused directly onto the regulator housing. Black crystalline plates unfolded from its surface like petals, each one pulsing with red light in perfect rhythm with the ship's gravity field. Tavern stepped closer. "Can you remove it?" "Absolutely." Seralyne looked at him. "That sounded too easy." "It is. Removing it will probably kill us." Tavern stepped back. Elias nodded approvingly. Excellent survival instincts. He crouched beside the housing and connected his scanner. Streams of symbols raced across the display. "The device is listening to the core. Every time the gravitic field adjusts, this thing adjusts with it. Pull it away and the frequency collapses." "And the core?" Seralyne asked. "Attempts to occupy several locations at once." She stared at him. "Is that bad?" "Generally considered poor behavior for machinery." Another distant explosion shook dust from the ceiling. Tavern activated his communicator. "Enemy boarding teams have entered Deck 9. "How long until they reach engineering?" Seralyne asked. "Minutes." Elias opened his tool case. "Then I need silence." Tavern looked offended. Elias glanced up. "That includes royalty." Seralyne folded her arms. "You become remarkably brave when holding a screwdriver." "It's insulated." For several minutes, only the electronic hum of the sabotage device filled the chamber. Elias traced its frequency through the ship's power architecture, searching for any channel stable enough to absorb the resonance. Then he stopped. "No." Seralyne recognized the tone. "What?" Elias enlarged a section of the schematic. "There are redundant power pathways everywhere." Tavern frowned. "That is standard Imperial engineering." "No. Standard engineering has 2 backups. This has 7. Seralyne's eyes narrowed. Elias slowly looked at her. Bureaucracy. For the first time since entering the chamber,
She smiled. The regulations you criticized. They forced the designers to install independent emergency networks because 5 different departments refused to share authority. Tavern stared at the schematic. You are saying administrative inefficiency may save the vessel? Elias looked genuinely offended. I am saying this once, and never again. He began connecting temporary conduits between the manifold and 3 emergency channels. Your bureaucracy is magnificent. Seralyne laughed. I will have that entered into the Royal Archive. If you do, I'll deny it. Energy fire echoed from the corridor. The guards turned immediately. Tavern raised his weapon. They are here. Elias kept working. Buy me 90 seconds. Tavern glanced at Seralyne. Your Majesty, behind the manifold. Seralyne instead moved beside him. I am not hiding while everyone else fights. Your Majesty. That was not a request. Tavern exhaled through his nose. Elias muttered, I'm beginning to understand why people obey you. Seralyne fired down the corridor. A flash of white energy answered. Work faster. Yes, your extremely armed Majesty. The chamber filled with a sharp crack of phase weapons. Elias connected the final relay and watched the frequencies align. Almost. Not enough. The resonance device surged brighter. Elias? Seralyne called. I know. You said 90 seconds. I was being optimistic. That seems unlike you. Stress changes people. The frequency climbed toward critical. Elias looked at the sabotage device, then at the emergency networks. Destroying the device was impossible, but changing what it believed the gravitic core was doing, that might work. He smiled. Seralyne saw it from across the chamber. I do not like that expression. It means I have an idea. That is why I do not like it. Elias rerouted the redundant channels into the sabotage device itself. The crystalline plates suddenly opened wider. Tavern shouted, What did you do? Confused it. That is your plan? Most machines hate uncertainty. The device began absorbing false harmonic signals from 7 different power networks. Its pulse became irregular, then violent. Elias slammed the final control. A deep vibration rolled through the deck. For 1 terrifying second, gravity disappeared. Seralyne floated several centimeters above the floor. Elias looked up at her. Your fountain impression is excellent. Gravity returned. The sabotage device discharged a massive resonance pulse through the ship's external field. The tactical display on Elias's wrist exploded with new signals. Outside the celestial meridian, the mercenary vessels suddenly lost phase synchronization. Their cloaking fields collapsed. 2 ships spun out of formation as feedback burned through their propulsion systems. At the same moment, long-range sensors detected Valorian patrol cruisers entering the system. The attackers began retreating. Tavern's communicator erupted with reports. Shields recovering, propulsion stabilizing, enemy vessels disengaging. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Elias sat heavily against the manifold. I would like to formally request a vacation. Seralyne lowered her weapon. Denied. He stared at her. You truly are the queen. Hours later, after the wounded vessel had returned to controlled flight, Elias entered the observation cabin expecting never to see her alone again. The damaged seats had been cleared. The stars had returned. Seralyne was sitting by the window. The seat beside her was empty. Elias stopped. She looked toward him. No guards? They are nearby. Of course they are. He sat. For a while, neither spoke. Then Seralyne said quietly, I should have told you. Elias looked at the stars. I understand why you didn't. She turned toward him. That surprises me. You got to be ordinary for a few hours. Her expression softened. No titles, no bowing, no people deciding what to say before you enter the room. Seralyne lowered her eyes. You treated me like everyone else.
Elias smiled faintly. I insult everyone equally. She laughed. And this time, with the battle behind them and no disguise left between them, Queen Seralyne realized that the sound felt different, because Elias now knew exactly who she was, and he was still sitting beside her. The celestial meridian reached Valoria Prime beneath an escort of 6 royal cruisers, their silver hulls gliding through the upper atmosphere like blades of light. Elias watched the capital expand beneath the descending transport. Towers suspended between artificial gravity pylons, rivers of airborne traffic, orbital elevators disappearing into cloud, and the distant royal citadel rising from a circular island of white stone. After everything that had happened aboard the ship, he expected the final hours to be filled with interrogations, medals, formal statements, and possibly an invoice for the luxury decks he had partially dismantled. Instead, Seralyne disappeared behind a wall of officials the moment they docked. She looked back once before the security doors closed between them. Elias lifted 2 fingers in farewell. Then she was gone. 3 days later, while repairing a cargo lifter at the planetary transit yard, Elias received a royal summons. He read it twice. His supervisor read it once and immediately took 3 steps away from him. What did you do? Apparently I survived. That usually doesn't require an audience with the Queen. You clearly haven't met her. The palace was even worse than Elias had imagined. Polished halls stretched beneath floating chandeliers. Silent service drones carried refreshments. Holographic murals recreated ancient Valorian battles across entire walls. 2 officials tried to explain court etiquette during the walk to the inner garden. Bow when Her Majesty enters. How far? Respectfully. That is not a measurement. Neither official laughed. Elias missed Seralyne already. He found her standing beside a fountain. Naturally, the water was flowing upward. It rose from a circular pool in hundreds of glittering droplets, floating several meters into the air before spiraling into a suspended sphere. Elias stopped. Seralyne turned toward him, wearing formal silver robes and a narrow crystalline crown between her long ears. He pointed at the fountain. You did this deliberately. Perhaps. You summoned me across half the capital to mock me. That is one interpretation. For several seconds they simply looked at each other. The distance between a mechanic and a queen should have felt enormous here. Strangely, it did not. Seralyne dismissed the attendants. I reviewed your emergency modifications. Elias grimaced. Am I being arrested? No. Good. I wore my clean shirt. She handed him a thin, holographic tablet. The investigation confirmed the attackers were hired by a consortium attempting to prevent the Karith trade treaty. Tavron's officers have already arrested several conspirators. And the ship? Fully repaired. The royal suites? Less fully repaired. Elias nodded solemnly. A tragedy for civilization. Her smile appeared. Then she became serious. I also reviewed the maintenance regulations you complained about. Elias looked suddenly nervous. That feels more dangerous than the mercenaries. You were right. He stared at her. Could you repeat that? No. I would like it recorded. It already is. She activated the tablet. A position appeared above it in glowing Valorian script. Technical Advisor to the Crown for Civilian Infrastructure Reform. Elias read the title slowly. That is terrible. Seralyne blinked. The position? The title. I would need another lifetime just to introduce myself. She laughed. You are refusing? I'm negotiating. And somehow, standing beside an impossible fountain inside one of the most powerful palaces in the sector, he did. The title became simply Royal Engineering Advisor. More importantly, Elias insisted that mechanics, pilots, station workers, and colony technicians be represented directly when new regulations were written. Seralyne agreed. Months passed. Elias discovered that government was much like repairing old machinery. Every system contained parts nobody understood, cables nobody dared remove, and at least one person insisting everything had worked perfectly before he arrived. He spent less time mocking bureaucracy from a distance, and more time trying to improve it from within. Seralyne changed too. She began visiting orbital shipyards without ceremony, speaking directly with workers instead of reading polished reports. Some ministers hated the idea. Elias considered that proof it was working. Their friendship survived the palace, which surprised them both. He still refused to bow when they were alone. She still threatened to have him assigned to fountain maintenance. Nearly a year after their first meeting, Elias boarded another diplomatic transport bound for the frontier colonies. The passenger cabin was crowded. Every seat was occupied except one. Beside it sat a familiar Valorian woman wearing a simple dark traveling coat, her crown nowhere in sight. Elias stopped in the aisle. Seralyne looked up innocently. "Is this seat taken?" he asked. "That depends." "On?" "Whether you intend to criticize the monarchy again." "No promises." He sat. She opened a meal container and pushed half toward him. Elias inspected it suspiciously. "What is this?" "Terran chicken." His face fell. Seralyne laughed. Outside the panoramic window, stars stretched into brilliant silver lines as the ship entered hyperspace. Elias took the fork. A year earlier, he had believed rulers lived somewhere above ordinary life, protected by walls, titles, and ridiculous fountains. Seralyne had believed being queen meant accepting the loneliness that came with being treated differently. Both had been wrong. Sometimes a kingdom changed through laws, treaties, and battles. And sometimes it changed because one exhausted mechanic sat in the only empty seat.